guys, it's ITW, and just a quick little update before the video starts. I've started playing on the Xor Redstone server, which is basically the premier Redstone development server. So the main way that this is relevant is that the chat might be a bit distracting in this video. I'm not going to be doing all my videos here just because not all of the builds that I have are on the server, but you can expect a lot more stuff to be done on here. But yeah, again, the main way that this is going to be relevant to us is that people are going to be talking in the chat as I'm doing this. That might be a bit distracting. If you think it's very distracting, let me know. I can always change that. Anyway, the other way that this is probably going to be relevant is that if you want to talk or build redstone stuff with me, this is probably going to be your best way to get in touch with me by getting on the server. I suspect a lot of my subscribers already know about Xor, but yeah, I just wanted to make that quick little update. Anyway, today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on parallel prefix adders and the Kogge-Stone algorithm specifically. Now this right here is a 16-bit Kogge-Stone adder. It's 7 ticks, and the funny thing about this adder actually is that it's anti-burnout, but it's not anti-burnout to improve the throughput. It's anti-burnout because building this thing out of comparators is actually faster than building it out of, torches. So yeah, that's just something kind of funny about this. Now, parallel prefix adders aren't really as common in Minecraft as they are in real electronics. But it's important to know how they work because they're so pervasive in real electronics that they're just a really important thing for you to learn if you're messing around with redstone. So I'm going to be building a Kogge-Stone adder. This specific design scaled down to 8 bits, by the way, and I'm also going to explain the logic behind this stuff because it's, again, really important. So yeah, I'll see you guys in a second. So the way I'm going to do this actually is that I'm going to actually go ahead and start building this right off the bat without explaining the logic first. The reason for this is that you already know, or at least you should already know if you're coming into this. By the way, you should, as far as stuff you should know coming into this, you should know how, carry look-ahead adders work. And that's really it. You don't need to know any other fancy stuff, just carry look-ahead adders. But anyway, back to what I was saying, which is that you should already know how an Xor Gate works, which is what this is right here. This is the first Xor of the entire adder. It's really important that the idea behind the carry logic for this thing is still fresh in your mind when we actually go ahead and build it, because Kogge-Stone and parallel prefix adders are a bit on the messy side when it comes to their carry logic. So I'm going to actually go ahead and build this all the way up so that we have this first half adder that we can start building the carry logic off of when we're done with this. So yeah, that being said, we're going to build a little something like this. The nice thing about this design is that the signal strength output is very strong, and this adder is going to depend a lot on having signal strength, lots of signal strength coming out of it. So yeah. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to add a block here, and I'm going to add another block here, and I'm going to add a block down there, and I'm going to OR these together, but I'm going to use a slab to do so. It's going to be relevant why we're adding the blocks and this slab in just a second, but yeah, just know that you need to do that. So the blocks are actually because this thing doesn't tile diagonally perfectly on its own. You need to do a bit of a stagger, which is going to look a little something like this. So here's the same design again, like that. And you see how the comparators in this one are 1 block forward. That's why we have these blocks, so that everything is even when we reach this output out here. So that powers that like that, and then that just comes around like this. So let's talk about why I decided to use this slab situation up here instead of just ORing them together like this. The reason that I wanted to do this is that in this adder, we're basically going to be using nothing but comparators for the AND gates, and we're just going to assume that one of the inputs to them is inverted. And we're going to set the whole thing up so that I can reuse the inverted signal for everything that needs to be inverted. This way we're going to have one inversion at one of the inputs, and that inversion is reused throughout the entire adder. So this could be a bit confusing to people just because if we're inputting numbers that are a little bit, that aren't exactly what they are, it might be confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab some torches, and I'll get rid of this sign. And I'm going to put some torches on here so that all of that is powered. And this way, when we have these levers on here, the input that's going to be inverted by default is already inverted, so we don't have to think, oh, the bottom input is inverted. We can just think, all right, so this is just the numbers that are going in. It's just going to make it a little bit simpler for us to think about things. And this is going to be an issue, isn't it? I'll move it one block back off camera. That's a bit unfortunate, but it's something we can live with. So now that that input is inverted, when we look at this bottom comparator that we separated from the main output of the XOR, we can see how this one comparator acts as an AND gate. And we can use this AND gate to generate the signal for the adder. Meanwhile, inverting one of the inputs for the XOR effectively inverts the output as well. So this makes the signal up here, the propagate, inverted. Just a refresher, by the way, on the terms. The generate is when a carry is generated, and a propagate is when a carry from a previous bit is propagated over to a more significant bit. So now that we understand how these logical equivalencies and logic gates are going to work, let's try to understand how the adder itself works. So to understand how parallel prefix adders work, we first have to remind ourselves of what an adder is supposed to do, specifically the carry logic. The goal of a carry look-ahead adder is to determine from the inputs of an adder all of the carries at once, rather than letting the carry compute them one at a time. Parallel prefix adders don't calculate carries all at once, but instead significantly reduce the number of steps that it takes to compute a carry. They do this by dividing the process of calculating carries into many, many simple calculations. And this is really fast because there are so many calculations being done that you have the information to do multiple calculations during each step. And this is why it takes fewer steps to calculate the carries. More calculations are being done in each step, so there are fewer stages in the process. So now let's talk about those computations that I mentioned and what exactly they are. The computations are done by cells that do logic to carry, generate, and propagate signals. These cells, called parallel prefix cells, take in data from any two bits of the adder and do two computations with them. First, they propagate carries from the less significant bit to the more significant bit. This is done by ANDing the generate from the less significant bit with the propagate from the more significant bit, and then ORing the propagated carry with the generated carry. It's pretty easy to see why that's useful, since the goal of the device is to calculate carries. They also calculate a new signal that can be used to determine if a carry is propagated across both of the bits. And you can do this by ANDing the two propagate signals, because a carry will only be propagated across both bits when both of the propagate signals are on. This way, you can use the new propagate to propagate a carry from before the less significant bit across both of the bits in question. You can see how this process can be used to calculate the carries of an adder in an orderly fashion, but it's important to remember why parallel prefix adders are so fast. They do many calculations in each stage so that the total number of stages necessary is reduced. Each stage of the addition process will have many of these parallel prefix cells running at once. So we've been talking about these very generic ideas and about how to make these parallel prefix adders, but what exactly do they look like? Where do you place these parallel prefix cells? And the answer is that there are many different places that you can put them to make a fully functional adder, and there are trade-offs between the different arrangements of cells that are possible. And one of these arrangements is called the Kogge-Stone algorithm, and it's the one that we're going to implement. But if you look around this area, I have a few diagrams of a few other ones that I'm going to be going over in a future video. This is the Kogge-Stone one right here, by the way. So yeah, but those trade-offs and what they mean are a topic for another day. Let's just get ahead and start building our adder, shall we? Whenever you're building a parallel prefix adder of any sort, I find that it's best to start building from the most significant bit, because carrying to that bit is the most speed-limiting factor in the entire adder. And speaking of bit significance, I've gone ahead and labeled each bit so that we can refer to it by number. So, oops, if I can press the right buttons, the most significant bit is 8, which is down here, and the least significant bit is 1, which is up here. Now notice how I said the least significant bit is up here. That's backwards from a lot of redstone adders, and that can be a bit confusing, but it's just something that we're going to have to bear in mind. It also means that the most significant bit is actually down here, and that needs to go there. Yeah, I made a few mistakes when I was pasting this up, but yeah, I did paste instead of paste -a. So actually, this is the most significant bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be building a parallel prefix cell here, since naturally this should always have some sort of parallel prefix cell, again, because the most speed-limiting factor in this design is going to be the most significant bit. And I'm going to do that by just adding a comparator like this. And what this is going to do is this is going to be one of the two AND gates that I talked about earlier. The AND between the propagate of the more significant bit and the generate of the less significant bit. The way I'm going to get that generate in is I'm just going to go like this. And yeah, that's really nice and efficient because we've just got this right here and that previous one right there. And now I'm just going to build like that. And I'm going to add this repeater to OR these together and to make sure that everything is synced up, because part of the point of this is to make it as synchronized as possible. And with that, we can now use this one cell to propagate a carry over from bit 7. So if we come over here to bit 7 and put a lever on it, then we can generate it out here. And now, if we turn this off, we can propagate it. Excellent! So we said that a parallel prefix adder uses many cells in each stage to reduce the number of total stages in the adder. So while this parallel prefix cell is processing, we can have many others functioning at the same time. So the more the merrier. The Kogge-Stone algorithm states that every single bit here should get a parallel prefix cell during the first stage. Now, we're going to be talking about why exactly this works a little later, but the important thing to remember about this stage, in terms of it, is that after we finish adding all of these parallel prefix cells, every single bit, its carry, that is this dust right here, will contain the information to have either generated a carry on that bit or have propagated a carry from the previous bit. And that will apply to every single bit. That part is key. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy this across all 8 of the other bits. Now, another important thing to note is that I'm not actually going to do the propagate calculation part of the parallel prefix cell in this just yet, and the reason for that is that the actual computation is a bit more important, and also it's going to be much easier for us to build that part of this design once we've finished all of the carry information, as opposed to building the propagate calculators as we go. So yeah, I'm going to paste this across all 8 bits, and then we can talk about the next layer. Oh, and one note about copying and pasting this. You should build this part down here so that you can just select from here to here. I already have it selected to copy and paste stuff. So now we have the first stage done, so let's move on to the next one. I'm going to send the carry from the 6th bit into a comparator to represent a parallel prefix cell. This is the 6th bit, by the way. And I'm going to add my parallel prefix cell like this. And by the way, the reason that I don't have this lined up with this is that otherwise I would have to have that block there, and that doesn't end up working with what we're going to do. So now here is where we can start to see Kogge-Stone, the Kogge-Stone equation in action. So after we do this, remember that this carry right here contains carries that originates not only on bit 6, but also bit 5. So after we propagate them to the 8th bit, then this will contain all carries that originate from bits 5, 6, 7, and 8. Notice how those are the 4 bits before bit 8. Now, remember what I said about how every carry contains the carry propagated from the previous bit. Well, because that's true, we can do this same combination for every other bit. So for bit 7, what we can do is we can take the carry out from bit 5, and we can send that into a parallel prefix cell, like this. And now, because bit 5 contains the all carries that originate in bits 4 and 5, plus that's being combined with carries that originate in bits 6 and 7, now every bit, all 4 bits before bit 7, contain all of the information, or contain all carries that originate in those last 4 bits. You're noticing the pattern here. So if we keep adding cells in this fashion, every cell in this layer will contain any carries that originate in the last 4 bits, and that is the Kogge-Stone algorithm. So after we do this another time on the 8th bit, then that's going to mean that any carry that originates within the previous 8 bits will be propagated all the way to that 8th bit. And that is a complete adder, because there are only 8 bits in this design. And that means that instead of taking 8 stages to propagate the carry across all 8 bits like you would in a ripple carry adder, these things take 3. That means that it calculates carries 2.7 times as fast. Now, the last thing we need to do is we're going to need to connect the carry from the previous bit to right here. That's pretty simple to do, though. We just use a slab tower. It's not really a slab tower, actually, at this level, so yeah, it just looks like that, and then we copy it across all 8 bits. And then we do similar cells. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm also going to finish the next stage. So the only thing we have left now is the propagate calculators, which is actually pretty simple. And the only thing that we have to remember is that the propagates are inverted by default, which means that we need to take make one-tick AND gates with the inputs and output inverted. But it turns out that it's actually pretty easy to do that, because if we look at a classical AND gate, looks something like this. This is really just an OR gate with this input inverted, and this output inverted. So, in effect, what that means is that for every place that we have AND in here, we can replace it with an OR gate, because, again, we started by inverting the propagate signal. And also, these comparators take inverted propagate signal. So, now how exactly do we do this busing? And there's really no right and wrong answer. I really don't think that there's that many trade-offs that can even be made with something that's this simple, but I'm going to show you the way that I've found that I think works best, and that is not to block it off like that, but to send these guys into a slab tower. So I'm going to do that for this guy, that for this guy, that for this guy, and up, up. And I'm going to do it for these 2 bits just to show off what it's like, because we're going, for the first propagate calculation, we need to or between 2 bits. And actually, I should have done it with this bit down here that I completely forgot about. I'm sorry, bit 8. Won't you forgive me? Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're just going to add a repeater like this on top, and then we're going to set a slab up there so that there's no conflict. However, there is a conflict in this design because now this redstone signal can flow up onto this bit, and we don't want that because this is the most significant bit and this is a less significant bit. So effectively this would be, this propagate signal would then be able to propagate it all the way to this bit when we only want it to be able to propagate it to this bit. So I'm just going to add a block, fixes all those issues, and yeah, it's a pretty simple solution. It's the smallest one I've found, and one other neat thing about it is that it doesn't reset the signal strength up here. Like with other designs I've experimented, what it's been is I'm powering it with a repeater like down here, and then what I do to get the propagate out of that is I take this power, and when it comes to, what's it called, adding a carry-in, that's a bit messy. But let's talk about adding a carry-in for a second, because that is something that you should also be thinking about when you're adding your propagates. At the end of the propagate calculation process, the propagates that you're left with are the information to propagate a carry from before this bit, also known as a carry-in. So that means that if we go through the process of going through all of the propagate calculations, then we have the potential to add a carry-in to this thing that doesn't add any delay to the actual adder, which is pretty cool and also pretty useful. The problem is that stuff gets a little messy when we get up here. I'm really not sure that I've found the best way to do this also, which is why I'm not going to show how to add a carry-in like that. But just know that you can in fact do that if you're designing some kind of different parallel prefix adder in Minecraft, or just doing building a parallel prefix adder in general. So yeah, that's how this first layer is going to work. The next layer and future layers are going to work a little differently. This is just the best way that you need to do this. But yeah, so I'm going to get this across all the other bits, and I'll see you guys when I'm done. Alright, I've got that copied across all the bits, so now let's talk about adding the last level to this. How are we going to get the propagates into these guys? And I found that after this second layer, on all the other layers, the best thing to do is this sort of repeater matrix like this. The reason I like this is that if your main other options are to bring this down like this, and sure, this works, but you have to block this off constantly, and that involves a lot of building. And I also don't think it's quite as fancy as this one. I just like it for its fanciness a little bit more. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to add a repeater setup like this to every single bit. And yeah, so then after that, what you need to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to repeat this signal for synchronization. And we're going to just send this into a slab tower. And that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to come up here, and I believe, I think I'm actually going to show how this is going to end up looking. Might be a bit difficult, at least for the most significant bit up here. Yeah. So my mistake was I I've been messing around with these propagate designs a little bit lately, and the problem is that that's really annoying because now I'm thinking about all the different designs that I've done recently instead about what I think the simplest one is. But yeah, just something like this. I'm going to go ahead and just take a random sample of what I did on another one, and I'm going to show it off here. So yeah, I'll see you guys when I've done that. Alright, here's a solution that's quite good enough. You're just doing this sort of zigzag thing. It comes up like this, and then you just make sure that you use a block on this repeater, so that, because this is going to be here, so I guess you could do it like, not by adding delay there, but like that, but this works just fine too. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and copy this design to all the other bits, and I'll see you when I'm done so we can add the finishing touches onto this adder. Okay, so before we actually do that, I do want to just show off how these propagates can be used. Now, it's important to note that these propagates are actually incomplete. And what I mean by that is that each one of these propagates is only the information to propagate a carry from the previous 4 bits, because that is the propagate necessary for this last, parallel prefix cell. Because in this, we don't actually calculate the propagates at the same time as, the parallel prefix cell. What we do instead is we calculate them before the next cell, if you know what I mean. So this is actually the calculation of the 2nd stage, even though it's powering the 3rd stage, because the result of this step should be powering this, but this step itself is technically part of the 2nd stage. And that means that this is incomplete. But, just to show that I'm not kidding about this, if we turn the first 4 of these on, we can see, or at least we should be able to see, if this is working, which it isn't because of that. I had some very bad errors that I made when I was building this, but not to worry, because now if we look at these 4 bits, we can see that all of them are off. So let's just make sure that this thing is actually propagating carries. If I turn this off, you can see that all of them instantly turn on. Whereas if I turn this off, all 4 of them turn off. And if I turn these most significant one of them on, then as you can see, that one turns off. So that is indeed the information to propagate a carry across those bits. But again, if we turn this off and we do it to this bit, then what ends up happening is that this carry right here is incorrect, as you can see, because it's the information to propagate a carry from the least significant bit and not the information to propagate a carry from before then. You need to do another repeater layer, which could potentially add some devastating delay, and this is where adding the carry in gets super messy. Again, I haven't found a good way to do this. Actually, I think I came up with another interesting idea that's like a hybrid of 2 of the ideas that I've done before a little while ago that I think might be the most practical thing I've come up with yet, but in any case, yeah, you just can't do that directly. But anyway, let's stop. Let's actually start building again. All right, so this second Xor is going to be the same design as the first one, only it's going to be a little bit staggered. I'm going to add these things alternating. That's just because of the way that this thing works. And this is the carryout, so it doesn't actually need to go through another Xor. And then finally, up here, this is actually, the carry into the least significant bit. So yeah, I'm going to just add that like that. And now we can start actually building this Xor Gate. So the way that this actually tiles is that this one is going to be backwards from the other one. So yeah, as you can see, these two are backwards. This is just the way that this thing staggers. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this across all 8 bits because it's a pretty simple design. And oh, I also need to do that because I forgot, and that. And yeah, now that is actually completely functional. And you'll notice that this corner block right here is in the same position on both sides. That's because it's tileable diagonally both ways in this sense, so I can, like, this corner block is down here on both sides, which is why I can do this in the first place. But yeah, so that's not cutting anything off, good. So I'm going to do this, and then what we can do is through this area right here. Actually, you know what, I'll just do the bussing off camera and actually add this right here. So I'm going to add a redstone block comparator setup inverter right here. And the reason for this is that this is just to keep it torchless and take the, what's it called, the actual XOR of the 2 inputs so that we can send it into this final XOR up here. But it also needs to be inverted because, remember, the output of this what's it called, first XOR is inverted to begin with, so we're going to need to invert it again to actually get it to what we want. Oops, sorry about that. Anyway, so with that out of the way, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy all this across, and then we can just power this and bus it up. And then we will have our completed adder. So yeah, I'll see you guys then. So one final important thing to note about this is that you want to make sure that the delay on these, what's it called, slab towers is correct. So this first XOR is always 1 tick, and this last XOR is always 1 tick. That's fine. The time that the carry delay takes depends on the number of bits. Every time you double the number of bits, the, what's it called, the amount of delay will increase by 1 tick. So for this 8-bit design, it's going to increase the delay by 3. So that means that there needs to be 3 ticks of delay between this first XOR and when it comes into the second XOR. So I've got 1 repeater here, 1 repeater here, and a comparator here for a total of 3 ticks of delay. And that's important because the main reason you would want to use an adder like this is for synchronization. So yeah. And another thing to note is that make sure that you use only, what's it called, the, only this, what's it called, XOR. You don't want to use one of the calculated propagates from the actual adder, you just want to use that XOR. But yeah. So that is the entire adder complete now. Actually, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these iron wires up like this, and the reason for this is that this just to isolate the signal strengths that are only so strong, because these XORs will output weak signal strengths that are effectively zeros, but you need to take them out a few blocks in order to make it so that they won't power the lights that I'm going to use as an output display for this thing. And then we can actually see this thing in action adding. 9. Alright, so let's do some really simple math. So, one of my favorite addition things, 11 plus 1 is 12, and the most common addition problem of all time, in at least in redstone and adders in general. 5 plus 3, and we get 8. Alright, so now I'm just going to do a carry out to show that this is just that every bit of this functions correct. So if I flip this off, you can see that at the same time everything turns off. There's a bit of a delay with redstone lamps, so you should see that, what's it called, stuff turns on before it turns off, but yeah, that's fine because that's just the way that redstone lamps work. So yeah, that's it. This is 5 ticks in total, which is actually much faster than my old anti-burnout CLE, which is one cool thing about this adder. But again, the most important thing about this adder is how commonly it is used in regular electronics. Now, I'm going to be making a video sometime, maybe not soon. It's probably going to be soon anyway, though, about different kinds of parallel prefix adders, because even if after seeing this you think, well, how else would you do this? There are actually other ways that you can do this that have specific trade-offs, like I mentioned earlier, but we're not going to be talking about those in this episode. So yeah, that's going to be it. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.